Jesus said, "I say to you that listen, love your enemies. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you." In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. Morality and ethics aren't something we hear much about these days. Of course, the subjects are still studied in seminary and in religious academia, as well as by those pursuing degrees in medicine or philosophy. But they are rarely part of our everyday social discourse, and that is unfortunate. For the moral principles that govern our beliefs and our behavior are at the very heart of what it means to be human. What is good and what is bad? Right or wrong? What are our moral duties and obligations, both as individuals and as part of a broader community? Today's lectionary readings challenge us to think long and hard about how we treat others, both those closest and dearest to us, and those who are strangers, or even adversaries, enemies. In the Hebrew Bible reading from Genesis, we hear about Joseph's loving, generous behavior towards his brothers, who'd betrayed him and left him to die in a pit. And in the gospel passage from Luke, Jesus spells out a Christian ethic for all of us that reverberates across the centuries. This ethic is often referred to as the Golden Rule, found in both the Gospel of Matthew and the Gospel of Luke, with Luke quoting Jesus as saying, "Do to others as you would have them do to you." Most cultures and religions have a similar rule. Indeed, the concept of the Golden Rule can be traced as far back as Confucian times in the 5th century before the Common Era. And it is found in the writings of Homer, Seneca, and Philo. But in this non-Christian context, the Golden Rule is usually stated in the negative, something along the lines of, don't do anything to another you wouldn't want them to do to you. In other words, this interpretation of the rule focuses on behavior modification, on restraint, on refraining from doing something. The version Jesus gives us demands action, not inaction or passivity. Jesus tells us to be proactive, to initiate good, even where it is undeserved, especially where it is undeserved. Jesus continues by saying that God behaves this way, and therefore so must we, if we are to fully live into our faith and our very being as beloved children of God. In our actions, in the choices we make, in our decisions large and small, we are not being compared to our neighbor. We are being compared to our Creator. Following the Golden Rule and attempting to apply it in our daily lives isn't so much keeping up with the Joneses as it is living into our baptismal vows. And here I quote from the Book of Common Prayer, our vows to proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ, to seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving our neighbors as ourselves, to strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. The background for this is a standard of loving that desires the best possible outcome for God's people, all of them, no exceptions. There are countless stories about this standard that describe the very best in human nature. But what do we do about people who deeply offend us personally, or even seek to hurt or harm us? Jesus starts this section of his sermon by saying, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold even your shirt. The colloquial expressions, turn the other cheek and give the shirt off your back, have their origins in Jesus' declaration of revolutionary love to the crowd gathered around him and to his disciples. But this can be so difficult. It can even feel impossible. And of course, if we try to live by the golden rule entirely on our own, by our own devices, we will fail. We have to rely on a power other than our own, greater than our own, God. Remember the words we utter in the sacrament of holy baptism? We will, with God's help. It is God who gives us strength and courage to offer love, unconditional love, radical love, revolutionary love. The late Walter Wink, New Testament scholar, Methodist minister, theologian, activist, and professor at Auburn Theological Seminary in New York City, helps us to see something very profound in Jesus' words. For Wink, Jesus' words are a form of nonviolent resistance to oppression. For Reverend Wink, Jesus is not telling people to remain victims, but rather to find new ways of resisting evil. Love your enemies, Jesus says. Do good to those who hate you. Authorities and oppressors don't really know what to do with this kind of resistance. They understand and embrace the power of intimidation and violence, but don't know what to do when people refuse to be victims, refuse to fight back with violence, and peacefully claim their rights. This is the ethic that moved the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others to kneel down before water hoses and snarling police dogs. And more than half a century later, it is the same ethic that moved 8 students yesterday on the University of Mississippi's basketball team to kneel on the court during the playing of the national anthem before the game. These young people were protesting not one, but 2 Confederate rallies taking place near the arena during the game. News reports stated that the pro-Confederate groups were marching from one Confederate statue in the small town of Oxford, Mississippi, to another Confederate monument on the actual campus of Ole Miss. Yesterday, not the 1950s or 1960s, but yesterday. So Jesus says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. But he also adds, don't be too impressed with yourself for being good to your friends. Anybody can do that, Jesus tells us. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you, he says. For even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much again. So just when we have the golden rule memorized, Jesus reminds us that it's far deeper than how we treat our friends and family. It's far deeper than what we hope to receive. It's even different from treating others the way we hope to be treated. Jesus comes back again to the place where he began. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. So how do we show love to people who seem to go out of their way to hinder us, even hurt us? Well, the first step is through prayer. By praying for them, as difficult as that might be. Or if we just can't manage to do that, by praying for God to give us the strength to start praying for them. Our first action should always be prayer. We can also prayerfully consider reaching out to those individuals who have wronged us. But that often requires great courage. And even when we do try to open up lines of communication, we risk being rebuffed. And this is where the sacrament of reconciliation can be of great help. Often referred to as confession in other Christian traditions, the rite is called the reconciliation of a penitent in the Episcopal Church, and is found on pages 447 to 452 in our Book of Common Prayer. In just a few weeks, it will be the penitential season of Lent. Always an appropriate time to reach out to others, to deepen our desire to forgive others as God has forgiven us, to forgive them for their sins as God has forgiven us for ours. This deliberate action can help restore our relationship with God and open the door for restoring our relationships with others in our lives. In God's time, not our time. Above all, what Jesus seems to be saying is that God's work is healing work. And as believers, as followers of Christ, we are all called to actively seek reconciliation and to show love. It may be showing love in an intensely personal family matter, as Joseph's was when he was abandoned by his brothers and then sold into slavery in Egypt. Or it may be far more abstract, but our spiritual health and our relationship with God depend on our being willing to treat others as we would be treated. You might say our very salvation depends on it. Love your enemies, Jesus says. Do good to those who hate you. When I hear hear Jesus' words now, I often think of Emmett Till's mother and Matthew Shepard's mother. Their own lives shaped by a gospel deeper than hatred, stronger than revenge. You all know Emmett Till's story. And Matthew was the University of Wyoming college student who was brutally beaten in 1998 by two men for being gay and was tied to a fence on a country road and left alone in the freezing Wyoming night to die. Matthew grew up in the Episcopal Church and now rests in peace and safety, having found sanctuary in the columbarium at Washington National Cathedral. The men who killed Emmett Till evaded justice. Decades later, the two men who killed Matthew were arrested, tried, and convicted of this brutal hate crime. In the state of Wyoming, being convicted of first-degree murder merits the death penalty. But Judy Shepard, Matthew's mother, asked the judge to spare their lives. Who can even begin to understand what she had gone through in all the agonizing months leading up to the trial? What parent could sleep with images of a beloved son tortured in such a way? What sort of people could do these things to other human beings? Judy is a witness to the power of the gospel and such unconditional, radical, revolutionary love and forgiveness can change the world. As Christians, we must believe that. Joseph displays immense generosity and unconditional love when he says to his brothers in the reading we heard this morning, "Come closer to me," and then kisses them and weeps. And Jesus tells us that one of the great triumphs of the human spirit is to remain loving in the face of adversity or enmity. So as we approach Lent, and as this congregation prepares to welcome a new priest, the wonderful Gail Fisher Stewart, a daughter of this parish, let us all ponder how rising above such hurt, such loss, such pain can be in itself a kind of daily resurrection.